Helldivers 2 is a third-person, 4-player co-op horde shooter where you defend the shining light of democracy from alien socialists that would deprive you of your right to vote. This video is not a full review, because the game is set up to be community-driven and the in-game story develops as the whole community achieves or fails in-game goals. I'll elaborate more on that deeper in the video, but the implications of what that means are not exactly obvious to me at this stage. For now, I'd like to hold off on talking about the game as a whole until I've played the game as a whole, which isn't possible right now. So instead of a review, this is going to be more like a very positive first impressions video. And in fact, anything other than a positive first impression on this game should be investigated immediately for possible treason. Because any freedom-loving citizen of Super Earth can tell you that this game is really good.
Join the fight for freedom. Enlist today.
First, let's talk about the gameplay. Movement and gun mechanics are very polished, they're very satisfying, it's a real highlight of this game. Running in a direction will have you vault and climb over small obstacles. You can slide into a crouch by running and then pressing the crouch button. You can do a Superman dive to dodge enemies, and that'll put you prone and able to shoot them off. Being prone can also be useful for avoiding friendly fire from your allies or allied turrets. Avoiding friendly fire and mitigating your own friendly fire is an essential skill in this game because the damage that you can do to other players is massive and immediate. If you're not careful, you'll be killing your teammates even on the easiest difficulties. Now the gunplay is very interesting, because they added a lot of interesting realistic elements to it. When you aim at something, there'll be a little white dot and a circle behind it. And as you aim in different directions, the circle will trail behind the dot. And what's cool about it is that the dot is not where you're aiming, it's where you want to be aiming. And the circle is where the gun is actually pointed to and where the bullets will go when you shoot. For very small guns, the two things are basically the same, and the circle will keep up with the dot pretty well. But for large, unwieldy guns like the machine gun, it will take a moment for the barrel of the gun to go where you want it to go. So if you're aiming in one direction and you rapidly move to a different direction, the gun isn't just going to snap to that position. The trailing circle that represents where the gun is pointed is most obvious when you're using the larger weapons. The crouch and prone positions are also important because the recoil on some guns can be severe, and moving and shooting at the same time will reduce your accuracy even more. If you want to shoot an automatic weapon at longer ranges, you're going to have to stand still. Or even better, crouching or going prone improves your accuracy further. On a cumbersome weapon like the machine gun, you'll notice an immense difference when you fire it from a stable position. The way ammo works is also realistic, in that if you reload your magazine before you fired off all of its bullets, those bullets won't magically go to your total, they're just gone. So, let's say you have 4 magazines, and you shoot one set of your magazine and then reload, then now you only have 3 magazines, and all of the bullets that you didn't shoot are wasted, which is something you'll need to be careful about, especially again for bigger weapons like the machine gun that come with fewer magazines than other weapons. You can resupply during the mission, but that will require you to summon a resupply pod, which will go on cooldown, and that cooldown is shared by all players. So you're encouraged to make use of the ammunition you have and not reload every couple of rounds. Speaking of the resupply pod, we should now talk about stratagems. Stratagems are ordnance that you can call down from your orbiting super destroyer. You can equip 4 stratagems before a mission, and you have a lot of variety. You can call in for heavier weaponry like the machine guns, flamethrowers, and anti-tank weapons. You can call in strikes from your orbital cannons. You can call in a strafing run or napalm strike from your starfighter. Or you can place things like anti-personnel mines and turrets. One of the best things about stratagems is just summoning them. Each stratagem has its own unique code consisting of D-pad inputs. Just the tactile feel of stratagems is nice, and it's a delight when you need to use them in a tense situation and you keep messing up the code. Each player unlocks and chooses to bring their own stratagems, and since each Helldiver has his own ship, the cooldowns are separate. Except for the resupply and reinforced stratagems, those are shared across all players and will go on cooldown for everyone when anyone uses them. The only exceptions are the resupply, which I already mentioned, that will go on a cooldown when anybody uses it, and there's also the reinforced stratagem. When you're playing in multiplayer, you'll have to use the reinforced stratagem to call down a new Helldiver, and so the number next to the reinforced stratagem represents the number of times you can die. The enemies are interesting in this game because you have to use your small arms, your heavy support weapons, and the wide variety of different stratagems that you have available to deal with the different situations that you'll encounter. And one of the most interesting is the way that the game approaches armor. Some enemies will have thick armor, and the ammo from your small arms fire is not going to be sufficient to penetrate it. You'll often see your bullets deflecting, doing no damage at all. And you'll just have to figure out how to deal with that, either by trying to shoot it where its armor is weaker, using a bigger weapon with armor-penetrating capabilities, or making use of your powerful stratagems. Thankfully, if you punch a hole in that armor is just gone in that spot. And if you shoot there, you'll be able to do effective damage with small arms fire. I was already excited for this game, but I didn't expect for the gunplay and the stratagems to work and feel as good as they do. It's snappy and responsive, but the more realistic elements they introduced are of great benefit to the game. The heavy recoil when you're moving, and the fact that some weapons will lag behind where you're trying to shoot, adds some weight to the experience. I think at this point it's safe to say that this is my favorite feeling game when it comes to third-person shooters. It's just a joy to move around and shoot and feel that heavy impact, hear the sound of the guns. It has great audio design on the bullets too. And then run from the enemies and slide into a crouch and fire. It's great. It's a really high-quality experience. And it has the added benefit of having in-game gyro functionality. For anybody that doesn't know, gyro aiming is where you aim by moving the controller around. The gyro behaves like a mouse and lets your aiming be much more precise than it would have been by just using the right analog stick. It's not quite as accurate as mouse, but in this way you can approach near mouse level of accuracy while still using a controller. It's my preferred way of playing most shooter games, and I'm really glad that it was introduced to Helldivers 2. Usually I just play on Steam and use the Steam options to enable my gyro controls, but in this way, even people on PlayStation will be able to use the gyro, which might be the first time they even find out about the gyro if they choose to do that. Alright, now let's talk about how the game actually plays. The gameplay loop consists of diving into these enemy-controlled territories, completing the main mission objectives and whatever side objectives that you think you can handle, and then extracting back into orbit. A very close equivalent is the mission structure of Deep Rock Galactic. The maps that you dive into are procedurally generated, and the mission objectives that you need to do are random and taken from a pool of possible objectives that change depending on what enemy you're currently fighting. There's a pretty big variety. The missions might have us assassinate a target, exterminate all the bugs in a certain amount of time, destroy a bunch of spawning points, retrieve something from somewhere and take it somewhere else, liberate some oil to fuel our helicopters, or capture an area and plant a flag there. There's a lot of different types of missions, and most of them are pretty fun. The side objectives are not necessary for completing the mission, but they'll give you more resources and experience if you complete them. The areas that you drop into are vast, and the game itself can be very challenging, especially in the harder difficulties. So whether or not to pursue those side objectives is an executive decision that you're going to have to make, based on how you think the mission is going so far. Now, once you complete a mission, you'll get your rewards, and there are several different types of currencies that do different things. First is the medals. These are used in the Warbond menu, and you use them to purchase weapons, armor, capes, emotes, boosters, and very small amounts of super credits, which is this game's premium currency. There are several different pages in the Warbond menu, and in order to purchase the stuff in the later tiers, you need to spend a certain amount of medals in the lower tiers. Missions will also reward you with this R currency. I don't actually know what the R stands for, but this currency is what allows you to buy new stratagems. You go to the stratagem menu over here, and unlock them when you have enough of this currency. What stratagems are available to be unlocked, however, depends on your level, which will increase naturally as you complete missions. Then finally there's the sample type currency. You can use samples to upgrade the ship's modules. Different modules will increase the effectiveness of different types of stratagems, so you should try and increase the type of stratagem that you've grown to favor. Samples are found on the planet, and different types of samples will be available depending on the difficulty that you're playing on, with the higher tier samples only available on the harder difficulties. Alright, now let's talk about the multiplayer. You can enjoy this game solo, and it's kind of interesting in some respects because playing solo without trigger-happy randoms or friends, lets you avoid a lot of the encounters that you would have gotten into otherwise. The bots and the bugs patrol around the map, and if you play carefully, you can just avoid them and get to whatever objectives you're trying to get to, only engaging and clearing out the areas that you want to. You can, of course, do this if you're coordinating with your teammates, but it's easier solo, because some teammates' profound love of freedom compels them to open fire on any communist alien that they see. Playing by yourself can be fun, but it's really not the focus of the game. This is meant to be a multiplayer game, and you can tell that because you can't play solo offline. This game is online only, and by default the lobby is open to the public, so people can join whenever they want. There is also several pieces of ordnance that require two people to use effectively, and there are often doors around maps that require at least two people to open. This is a multiplayer-oriented game, and you'll have the most fun playing with others. Which is a problem because on launch there was a lot of multiplayer problems that have not yet been completely cleared up. I've seen lots of people have crashes and disconnections. Personally, I had a mostly stable connection when I was playing with friends in a closed lobby, but the quick play doesn't seem to work very well even now. And the quick play is important. I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be playing exclusively that. Not everybody has friends, at least when they begin, to play with. And that's one of the reasons why I wasn't comfortable giving this game a full review. We should probably cover that, actually. The most important reason that I'm not giving it a full review is actually tied to the story. The story is being told in an interesting way. The developers had goals for the community to achieve, and apparently, depending on how we do on those goals, the story will develop in, interesting ways. At launch, they have us building a terminate control system to quarantine the bugs, and the automatons aren't terribly important at the moment. Now here's the thing. At launch, there were 4 maps available for you to play in. Those maps were tied to corresponding planets. 2 of them were controlled by the bugs, and 2 of them were controlled by the automatons. Each one of those maps is pretty distinct. They're very nice looking. And I'm assuming as the war progresses and new story objectives are prioritized, new planets will be available for us to helldive into. And in fact, that's exactly what did happen. Heath was liberated, and that got us access to the next system, which has itself 2 more planets. Those 2 new planets have unique individual environments. And in fact, I noticed that each one of the planets has a description on it. They have names and they have a description of what the planet is like. And interestingly, we can still see planets on the map even if we can't dive into them because they're fully liberated. In fact, you can see a lot of planets across the galaxy. And if you hover over those planets and scan them, you can see what environmental effects those planets have, if they have any. Here on this cluster, you can see all of the planets here have some kind of environmental effect. Things like thunderstorms, blizzards, intense heat, fog. And so my question is, how many of these planets have unique individual maps tied to them? All of the ones that we've been to so far have their own biomes that are visually distinct, and they look really nice. They're quite impressive. It's a very pretty environment. They make great use of lighting and atmosphere and fog effects. So does that mean that every single one of these planets has a unique map? How many different biomes exactly are we going to have access to in the game as the war proceeds and the story develops? So to me, it's not obvious how many maps we're going to have, or an estimate of how many maps we're going to have, whether the planets will each have its own map, or if they will reuse the maps of previously seen planets, to the point that we have, 10 planets using the same snow map or what have you. And the game's marketing hasn't been forthcoming with that information. I'm sure we can all draw assumptions, but until I know for sure how that's going to work, I hesitate to speak on it further. There's also the possibility that they might introduce a third faction somewhere down the line. They've already confirmed that they're going to introduce vehicles and mechs soon after launch. And the developers have confirmed that story events will unfold through its planned free updates, and that these updates will give players refreshed gameplay, new tools, challenges, and new threats. And that new threats line sounds to me like they're going to make new enemies at some point. They could mean a new bug for the bug class or a new robot for the robot class, but I think they mean a whole new enemy faction at some point, even if it's not soon, because the game would really shine with one more enemy faction. That's not to say that the two factions that we have are boring, not at all. Both the bugs and the automatons are fun and interesting to fight, and they're very different from each other. The bugs focus on group tactics, trying to hoard you, flank you, and their strategy is always to get up close into melee range. And it's a really startling experience the first time you go against the automatons and realize, oh, they shoot back. The two factions put you in different kinds of situations, which might cause you to approach those situations in different ways. Still, as good as the two enemy factions are, I really do think the game could use a third enemy type. And I hope they introduce one in a future update. Finally, we need to talk about the premium currency and have me explain how that works. Basically, it's garbage. I already explained the Warbonds. You gain medals through doing missions, and you spend them on the first Warbond that you have access to for free. And as you spend your medals there, you get access to the higher tiers of that Warbond. Well, on release there's also the Premium Warbond that you can buy. It costs 1,000 super credits, which I believe is like $10. Once you unlock that warband, you then spend your medals on that in the same way as you do in the first one. The warband has emotes, weapons, armor, capes, and you don't just get it for free, you still have to spend the medals that you earn on those items. There's also a rotating store that will update every couple days, I think. So far the store has only had armor and helmets. I haven't seen it have weapons of any kind. And the armor isn't that much of an issue, because the perks that come on the armor are not really different than the perks that you see in the regular store. And neither are its stats. They seem to correspond with the stats of other things that you have available. That goes for the armor available in the Premium Warbond and what's available in the Superstore. Although admittedly the Superstore has only been there for a few days, and we haven't seen the bulk of what it might have. There is a little bit of a problem though, because while it might not be objectively superior all the time, the perks and stats that are tied to the armor in the Superstore don't always have a comparable equivalent to the armor that you can buy normally without premium currency, or even right now with the Warbond that we have available. For example, this armor that I got doesn't exist in the normal Warbond, or even in the Premium Warbond. It's the lightest tier of armor, and this combination of stats and perks isn't acquirable without spending super credits. So if you really wanted this type of armor with these stats that's super light and fast, that had these specific perks, the only way to do that at the moment is to buy it from the Superstore, which rotates so it'll be gone in a day. In a Steam post where the developers were talking about how the Warbonds were going to work, they mentioned that they hated fear of missing out, and how they designed their premium Warbonds to avoid that. But it seems to me that if you really hated fear of missing out, you wouldn't develop a rotating store with items that are both interesting cosmetically and useful practically. Again, I repeat, there is no light armor in the game that will give you specifically these perks other than this one. This might change later, there might be other armors in the store, or they could add premium Warbonds in the future that also have this armor. But for the moment, as of right now, if you really wanted this type of armor connected to these types of perks, your best bet is to buy it, because who knows when you're going to see another one. Which is not great. But the real problem isn't even the armor, it's the weapons. Because there are no weapon skins in this game, the weapons that you see in the Premium Warbond are unique. Those are real weapons. So the only explosive assault rifle of this type is right here. Does this make it pay to win? Not yet. From what I hear from people, the weapons in the Premium Warbond are not objectively better than the other options you have available. In fact, from what I hear, the explosive assault rifle is actually worse than the normal variant that you have access to immediately. The issue though is that it seems that all new Warbonds from here on out that are released for the game will be the premium kind. The non-premium warband that we have access to is fairly long, and it's going to take most people a long while to get to the bottom of it. But once you do, I don't believe they're going to add more to that warband or add other non-premium warbands for you to do. Which means that all the new weapons the game introduces will be weapons that you can only get by purchasing the premium warbonds. And according to the game's FAQ, they're going to release these warbonds every month. So I have a hard time believing that eventually we won't get a weapon or series of weapons that are going to be better than the paid alternative. The FAQ also mentions that there won't be stratagems included in Warbonds, but that they may add them to Warbonds or Superstore in the future, which is of course very concerning. Now the saving grace is that the Warbonds aren't like battle passes, they are forever. They'll be at the store at any time, and you can buy them and upgrade them at your leisure. And the premium currency, the super credits, can be gained in-game. And you can also use your in-game currency to buy a set amount of super credits that are available with the first free Warbond that they gave you. The super credits can be found on maps in various points of interest. If you go to those points of interest and happen to find the super credits, they give you about 10. So if you do that 100 times, you should have enough for a premium Warbond, or at least the first premium Warbond. We don't know how much the next ones are going to cost. It is fairly easy to farm them. Currently, you don't get a higher rate of super credits based on the difficulty, so you could put the game on the easiest difficulty, load into maps, wander around at the points of interest, and finish the mission. I haven't tested exactly the rate of acquiring super credits in this way, but given that there's a month between each Warbond, and that you'll also gain them just by playing normally and not necessarily farming them, you would probably be able to get enough super credits for the next Warbond if you really tried. So, in terms of game monetization, it's not the worst thing in the world. But it not being the worst thing in the world is not a good standard to set for these types of games. I don't think people should be breathing a sigh of relief just because, oh, it's not as bad as it could be. My biggest problem with it is that they've expressed an openness to make it a lot worse. In their FAQ, they said that in the future they might put stratagems in the shop or as part of Warbonds. And that I think would just be the worst. That would be bad enough if it was just in a Warbond, but it would be much worse if they put it in the rotating store. Especially if it was good, and of course it's going to be good, why else would you want to buy it? And if it rotates in and out, only showing up periodically, triggering people's fear of missing out, then that would just be beyond the pale. I'll probably have more to say on this once their new Warbonds get introduced, their prices get introduced, and the process of acquiring or farming super credits becomes better known and more streamlined. That way I can better judge the difficulty of getting access to those Warbonds when you're not spending money. Normally I wouldn't bother with this type of game. I don't play live service games in the first place, mostly. And certainly not when unique weapons and armor are locked behind a paywall. But I am in this case because Helldivers 2 is just really good. Its atmosphere, story, and dialogue are appropriately over the top. The gunplay is some of the finest I've seen in third-person shooters. I really can't overemphasize how good it feels to move and aim and dodge backwards and shoot at the enemy that's going at you, or throwing a grenade at one of the bug holes to close it up, or the satisfying feeling of using the right stratagem at just the right time for maximum democratic effect, or just the simple joy of the careful preparation and play that the game encourages when you're playing with others. You guys are a danger to yourself and to your allies, so you're incentivized to watch where you're shooting, watch where you're placing your airstrikes, where you're placing your turrets, how much ammo you're using up, and what weapons you're using for what encounters. It's great. This is a real co-op game, where you can be a mighty and terrible inconvenience to those around you. In the future, once I know how the story is going to develop, what kind of new content they have planned for these updates, you know how many maps we're going to have total, and how badly the microtransactions will end up damaging the game, I'll make another video. And I'm hoping that in that video I'll be able to give Helldivers 2 a completely positive review. That's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.